this webinar is going to be fairly hands-on. I've got a few slides to kind of talk about stuff, and then I kind of wanted to jump in and do some live demos and talk about some specific stuff and give you some ideas. So bear with me. You know how the live demos go. I didn't sacrifice to the demo gods this morning, so who knows? I guess we'll see what we get. But yeah, there was probably some other announcements I should have had about secure ideas and how great we are and all that, but I'm going to skip over that and get to the content. This webinar is focused on the Mitre attack framework. I think by now, probably everybody has heard of Mitre, heard of the attack framework, but may or may not know the details of what it is or how it works or how you can use it in your environment and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to try to go through that. There's a lot of detail that you can get lost in. My goal for today is to kind of get you past that detail so you can know a little bit about, how you can use the attack framework in your organization. So my obligatory bio slide, Nathan Sweaney. I'm based in Tulsa, and I've been with Secure Ideas for quite a while, 8 years now or so. But my name's fairly unique, so you can Google me and find out all you want about me if you'd like. So I mentioned the goal here. I want to get you through some familiarity with the attack framework so that you can, if you've heard it before, or even if you've looked at it a little bit but aren't really sure what to do with it, where to go. I want you to be comfortable getting started and saying, okay, how can I use this in my organization? I'm going to give you some ideas on things you can do, some things that I've seen work and things that maybe don't work so well. We'll talk about that. And hopefully we'll have a good time. I don't know. You know how these webinars go. Some of them can be boring, but I try to mix it up, and I'll probably slip in some stories or chase some rabbits as we go. That's just kind of what I do. If you just joined, I mentioned kind of right as we were starting that the attendee mics and cameras option is on. If you want to share, if you want to ask questions or jump in or whatever, just be aware of that so you don't accidentally do that and embarrass yourself. So I'm going to start here, going back a little ways. This is the cyber kill chain. I was taught that anytime somebody says cyber kill chain, everybody has to take a drink. I didn't plan ahead and prep you for that. I apologize. But the cyber kill chain was something created by Lockheed Martin back in 2011. And, it's, I don't know. I always hated the word cyber. I've kind of gotten used to it. It's the thing. It's the word, government kind of started using it, and then the military, and it's just what it is. But as the government, the military, and those organizations were, they were pretty far along, but as they were starting to get deeper and stuff was becoming more public, you had stuff like this come out. In 2011, Lockheed Martin put this out as a way to think about the process of an attack. It's very much influenced from a military perspective, right? You have a kill chain of all the different steps leading up to a specific situation. In this case, what they did is they analyzed common attacks, things that hit organizations and all the different entities, and they said, okay, what does an attack kill chain look like? Are there certain consistent aspects of an attack? And so you've got reconnaissance, where you're analyzing an organization, and then you've got weaponization and delivery of that attack, whatever it may be, that payload. Then you have the actual exploitation, and even like Metasploit separates the payload delivery from the actual payload, right? There's the transport system, and then there's the payload. And so the cyber kill chain kind of split that up. The installation of malicious code onto the target system, you've got command and control back and forth of some method, and then you've got exfiltration of data or some type of interaction like that. Not every single attack necessarily has every one of these points. Some of them skip certain steps. Some of them have different goals and whatnot. But overall, it wasn't a bad way to think about this process. Like I said, in the beginning, I think it was pretty marketing focused. It was Lockheed Martin as a defense contractor. It was their way to speak the language of the military and explain why you should pay them lots of money for all their products. And as such, I think to this day, I think we still owe Lockheed Martin 50 cents for every time we say cyber kill chain. So we take a drink, we pay them 50 cents for their trademark, and then we move on. But what we saw over the next 10 years was the concepts behind the cyber kill chain started to become more and more built into our worldview of cybersecurity. The way we look at attacks and response and detection and prevention and all those different things, the way we think about that kind of mapped well to this kill chain. And so as much as I want to give Lockheed Martin a hard time about it, and all the FUD and everything that's gone along with it over the last decade, there's some value there. There's some intelligence, and it was well thought out. But the problem is it's missing some detail, right? It's really easy for a lot of organizations to say, well, you know, buy our product, and what we do is we help prevent the delivery phase. And so, you know, the attackers can't get their malicious content into your organization, or, you know, buy our DLP product and we help prevent the exfiltration phase. Buy our application whitelisting and, you know, we prevent the installation phase, or our EDR tool prevents the command and control. You know, there's a lot of marketing around that, a lot of products developed specifically to handle different components. And there's been some good innovation over the years. There's been a lot of neat products that have come out and that sort of thing. But the level of detail of understanding attacks was missing. And I think that was just the nature of the evolving landscape of the attack attribution world, right? There wasn't a lot of research being done into who are the attack groups, what are they doing, what does that look like, all that kind of thing. So fast forward just a couple of years, really, 2013, this gentleman, Blake Strom, young college dude, went to work for the DoD for a little while, got out, and he went to work for Mitre. And he was put in charge of a project. Literally his first project at Mitre was the Fort Meade experiment. If you're not familiar with Fort Meade is where the NSA is. There's some other big organizations there. A lot of spy versus spy stuff going on in that area. The Fort Meade experiment, there's really not a lot of detail out there about it. It's mentioned, FMX is mentioned in a few places, but it's hard to find detail. But effectively, Blake was put in charge of this idea of saying, you know what, if we can gather enough data on endpoints, right? All of the endpoints in a sufficiently large organization, if we can gather enough data, can we empirically determine when malicious activity is happening? Honestly, I think this was the beginning of the whole EDR thing, the endpoint detection and response, right? At one point it was called next gen antivirus, and then it was EDR, and now we have XDR and MDR and, you know, all the other marketing stuff. But I think this was early on and towards the beginning where they said, if we can gather enough data, can we do heuristical analysis? Can we do behavioral detection to determine that something is malicious here before it triggers one of those other phases, right? Like something hasn't actually been installed, but we see something's going on. This is odd. So the problem is, as part of this project to figure that out, Blake said, okay, well, it's really hard to track down incidents, right? When an incident happens at a large organization, they fix it. They get their forensics team, their incident response team, they come in, they figure out what's happening. And a lot of times we don't know about it until it's too late. And so, you know, the government doesn't necessarily have the insight into some of those organizations. If the organizations are required to come public, if they're required to report the incident, even if it's not a full-fledged breach, if it's an incident, a lot of times that reporting doesn't come till much later. And by that point, the endpoint data is gone, right? And worse, you can't collect endpoint data on all of these large organizations all the time in hopes that they will be breached or compromised in some way. And then you can gather that and compare, you know, it's the chicken and egg thing. How do we do this? So Blake started saying, wait a minute, let's think about attacks. Let's look back at all the history of all we've got. Let's think about what attackers do, right? This is just a couple of years after Lockheed Martin introduced the cyber kill chain. And he started thinking, I can do this, right? I can put on my black hat. I can think like an attacker, and I can start to simulate these types of attacks. And I can, that's what we do as pen testers, right? Here at Secure Ideas. He started to say, let me think about the entire process. Now, the difference is he doesn't have 2 or 3 weeks to come in and do a pen test and, you know, try to get a general overall feel for the organization. His goal was to get down in the weeds and spend as much time as necessary to simulate, and not even simulate. He was recreating specific types of attacks and threats and techniques and all this kind of stuff. Basically what he did, he took what we were already doing. He took what Lockheed Martin had talked about, and he made a really kick-ass spreadsheet, right? Like he statistically analyzed this stuff. This guy is an accountant, effectively. He said, let's make this really cool, extremely detailed document that outlines everything. But I realized I didn't actually explain who Mitre was. So let me come back to that for just a second. Mitre is a nonprofit organization that is primarily focused on research and design. Almost all of their funding comes from the federal government. Not all of it. They have some private public partnerships with some groups. But their stated goal, like if you go to the Mitre website, it says, we solve problems for a safer world, right? That's all happy and lovey and whatnot. But legitimately, their goal is trying to put the smartest people they can find into situations and give them the resources necessary to figure out how to make things better. That's how they got guys like Blake. I've got some really close friends that have worked for Mitre, and honestly, they're some of the smartest people I know. So Mitre is kind of in that, like, not quite government, not quite private, kind of for the public good. But it's kind of shady. We don't see everything that's going on because there's some confidential, classified stuff in there. But the stuff that they do put out, the persona, the reputation, the resources and assets, they've done such a good job that they have a really good, they have a really good reputation in the community. And so that's basically who Mitre was. So, they bring on a guy like Blake. They say, here's what's going on. He starts looking at it and he builds the attack spreadsheet. What is attack? Well, adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. Having tried to come up with titles and talk names and company names and product names, all based on acronyms and throwing letters together, I'm really impressed with this. I got to be honest. The ATT&CK, like that was, I want to know the story sometimes. If I ever meet Blake, I want to sit down and talk through that. Adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. Because it really is what it is. It's an open database, right? It's an open spreadsheet of kind of the, when we talk about like the CISSP, we have the common body of knowledge, right? The CBK. That's what this is. This is a common knowledge of adversarial tactics and techniques. It's a very carefully curated knowledge base. They started out with a fairly well-developed collection of details, but then they opened it up to the community and said, hey, what are we missing? And then, the community starts saying, oh, well, you got this, you need to add this. You know what, you've got this, but that's really two separate things. Those should be separated. Or you've got this over here and that's that's all the same thing. Maybe they can be linked together. And it's really expanded over the years and it's become really powerful. Lots of folks are contributing. Secure Ideas is a contributor. Eric Keene, one of our consultants, has added some stuff in there for us, some things that we found. So it really is a global cooperative body of common knowledge to help analyze attacks and attackers and motivations and threats. Effectively, it's a model of attackers, right? So we're going to dig in just a second and look at specifics of how that works. A couple of things, they separate or distinguish between tactics and techniques. So a tactic is sort of the why of why we do things. When we look at the framework here in a few minutes, we're going to see things like persistence or privilege escalation or I'm trying to think of some of the others. Infiltration, different types of things like that. Those are tactics. This is my goal. This is what I want to do. This is how I'm trying to move to the next step. The technique is, hold on one second. The technique is the how of the tactic. It's, okay, I have this goal. This is what I'm going to do, but how do I actually get that done? Specifically, what do I need to do for that? Some other of the data points are the threat groups. So one of the things that Mitre has done fairly recently, this was kind of a later addition, is they started going through, let me back up. There's several organizations that have analyzed different attack groups. If you may have remembered when, who was it that first introduced the idea of APT? I can't think of the organization. There's a company, Mandiant. I think it was Mandiant that first promoted the term APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. And as such, what they said is, we've been, as part of our investigations, part of our response, we've been analyzing certain tactics and techniques. And what we found is that certain groups in certain areas, they teach their people to do things a certain way. They use certain tools, they use certain processes, they get in here and then they do this and then they do this. And so they were able to, through some statistic analysis, able to determine this particular group of people do it this way, this group do it this way, this group do it this way. And there's some crossover, there's some bleed over. But in general, when you look at certain types of attacks, if you have a sufficient amount of information about the details of the attack, you can start to attribute that attack to certain people. That's in large part how we were so quickly able to determine who was behind the SolarWinds attack. I think that was Fancy Bear, if I remember correctly. Fancy Bear is just a name of a Russian attack group, a threat group that tends to work in a certain manner, a certain fashion. So what happens is basically they look at these, they say, okay, here's the techniques they use. Mitre then has taken that detail and said, okay, here's our big body of common knowledge. We're not going to say, if you're being gone after by this particular attack group or threat group, here are the types of things they do. If you're seeing these particular things, you can look at it and see, oh, those are all used by this particular group. You can get some idea of, maybe particularly who's targeting your organization, or if you were compromised, maybe who's responsible for that. Like I said, that's still fairly new. And I think a lot of that information it's a little muddy right now. It's interesting. I would not depend on it solely. It's kind of a neat thing to look at, but I'm always hesitant when people stand up and say, oh, this particular group did this for this reason. I mean, unless you really know for sure that happened and why, I tend to stay away from that. Another part of it is, and this I think is better, is the introduction of software. So they start saying, you know what, there's a lot of common tools, a lot of both commercial tools and utilities and whatnot, as well as like command line tools, built-in operating system commands, standard utilities. So some of those, for instance, like, on the operating system level, the net command, task list, netstat, stuff like that. Utilities like sysmon or psexec or, any of the sysinternal stuff. Attack tools like Metasploit, Mimikatz, Netcat, all of these different types of things are tooling that if you have enough detail from the endpoint about what has happened during attack, you can look at it and say, okay, you can start keeping track of these tools are used for these techniques by these attackers, and you can do some really interesting analysis. And then the other side is the malware, and this has actually grown significantly. They have a very detailed list of malware, so you can go in and say, okay, this particular malware, I want to do some research on it. What groups are using it or have at least been seen using it? What techniques does it use? What tactics does it attempt to pull off? And you can get some more information about that. So as a research tool, as an analysis tool about what's working and what's not, it works really, really well. It's just a ton of information. And then the third thing to include there is the matrices. So when we look at it here in just a second, you're going to see this huge matrix. It's like I said, it's a big spreadsheet of the different tactics across the top, individual techniques going through the middle of it. And then, the different, you can separate it and you can say, okay, I want to look at enterprise level stuff, which is actually broken down into subcategories. You can say, I want to focus on mobile based attacks. And then they're actually working on stuff specific to ICS, industrial control systems. So when we talk SCADA and we talk about power plants and utility plants and stuff like that, I think where this is going and the rate of popularity, I think we're going to get to the point probably in the fairly near future where we have several different types of matrices for several different types of organizations, I guess. You've got like public e-commerce sites, and I could imagine you get to the point where you have a matrix that is specifically about the techniques used to go after that type of e-commerce site. We'll see. I don't know how much it'll expand, but it's really interesting to see the work there. All right, so let's dive in. You wouldn't believe how much I agonized over which picture of a diver to use. I was like, oh, I don't want to show too much skin, and is it, is this appropriate or is it inappropriate? And finally, I just picked one and went with it. All right, so the attack.mitre.org. I'm just gonna jump on here and show you guys live, and hopefully this doesn't break. So attack.mitre.org. There's tons of information. They do a really good job of. They've got some getting started stuff. You can take a tour and it'll walk you through. If you actually, I think the getting started, it's got several. There's an ebook. There's some videos. There's a lot of great stuff here. There's a pretty in-depth philosophy paper that explains this is why we did it. Basically, they take 20 to 30 minutes explaining what I just did in the last 10. So, take that on your own if you want. The SparkCon presentation here from, I can't remember the lady's name. I think it was Rachel. She did a really good job of explaining kind of their overarching goal. That's not going to teach you how to use it, but it kind of shows you here's their goal, what they're doing, and where they're going with it into the future. It's pretty neat. So anyways, neat stuff you can look at there. But if we look at the actual matrix, and I'm going to start here with the enterprise matrix. So, over here on the right, you got the different areas. You can break it down. I can say Linux, or, just show me the stuff related to Windows, or just show me the stuff related to network. Down here, we've got the mobile, like I talked about before. Scroll over there and see if there's any questions. All right. But if we just start with the enterprise, you've got this huge spreadsheet, all of these stuff. And as you can see up here across the top, we've got our tactics. We've got reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, execution, persistence. And for each one of those, you can click into it and get more detail. So for instance, if I say privilege escalation, I'm going to click on that. And there's a little bit of detail about what privilege escalation is, why it's important. They've organized the tactics and the techniques very well. And so you've got this numerical system where you can look at the IDs and see what it is and understand. But you can go through down here for each of these tactics, you can scroll through and look at specific techniques. So these are the hows, right? The specific ways to execute or pull off a particular technique. Print processors, active setup, logon scripts on Windows, network logon scripts, so many different things, screensavers, application shimming, hijacked execution flaw, DLL search order hijacking, all of these different ways to do privilege escalation. And as you can see, it scrolls and scrolls and scrolls. You'll also notice that it's broken up into categories. So for instance, like abuse elevation control mechanism, T1548, that actually is broken into set UID and set GID, which bypass user account control, sudo and pseudo caching, elevated execution with prompt. All four of these fit in. These are sub techniques of the primary technique. And so that's where I mentioned, people have taken and said, hey, this one thing is really two separate things. Let's provide separate detail. And if we dive into each one of those, for instance, bypass user account control, we get a lot more detail about all of this. Tons of neat stuff you can go through there and see. And you've got information over here about the platforms that are affected, the permissions that are required, data sources. I'm going to come back to data sources in just a little bit. What defenses it bypass, contributors. Casey Smith, can't remember his handle. Casey Smith's been really involved with Windows privilege escalation and stuff like that over the years. Done a lot of really neat stuff. Anyway, there's a lot of information there. Like I said, MITRE is ultimately an R&D organization, so they've put a ton of information into that. So for each one of these, then we could dig into specific procedures on different groups of how they pull off this bypass user account control. And so you can get in here. The Cobalt group has G0080. Cobalt Strike is a tool. It can be used in different ways. And just tons of information. You get a little bit further down and you get mitigations, right? So you can audit and check for users that have been able to bypass user account control where they shouldn't, remove users from local admin group, update software, user account control settings. You get into detection mechanisms, ways that you can do that. That's where I wanted to go a little bit with, let me see where I've got slides wise. So yeah, so one of the things with the detection is it talks about different data sources. If I go back up here to the section where, here we go. For each one of these techniques, you have data sources, and you can see the command execution, process creation. Each one of these is then expanded into more detail. So like if I click process, that's going to take me to the YAML file, I guess, that shows, let's see, information about instances of computer programs that are being executed by at least one thread. That is not the one I was thinking of. Some of these show like where the some of the tooling about where you gather that information. Anyway, we'll come back to that in just a second, because I'm going to show you how you can use those data sources to find out what your coverage looks like and whatnot. If I go back here to the matrix, some other things you can do, you can expand. Like by default, it doesn't show those sub techniques that we clicked on and saw. But if you click show sub techniques, now this just expands out and gets really, really big. And my screen is too small. I can't see the scroll bar at the bottom. There is no scroll bar at the bottom. I guess I gotta go this way. So anyways, you can see that it gets really big. Obviously, if you have a bigger monitor, that's maybe a better way to do it. With the layouts, you can do a flat layout instead of side by side, and then it just expands everything down. So lots of different techniques. I really, really like the interface that they've built here. It does a really good job. So let me switch back over to my slides. A couple of techniques or a couple of use case things that you can do, ways that you can use this. One is just general education, right? This is a great way to dig in and learn and understand different attacks and learn how groups work and different things like this. We occasionally use this with, like when we're doing pen tests, to think, all right, what have I not done? Sometimes we get to a point where it's like, I can't get any further in the organization. Is there somewhere else I can do? Is there something else that I haven't thought of? Let me scroll through here. The pen test execution standard is kind of like that. It's kind of like a huge, massive checklist that isn't practical to follow on a step-by-step basis, but it's great to scroll through and say, okay, how do I do this? Or, oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, let me go try that. So the general education side. It's also good for looking at the coverage of your internal security controls. And I've got a exercise in just a second where I'm going to show you ATT&CK Navigator, and how that works. So you can get an idea of, here are the controls we have in place. Here's how that covers different parts of the Mitre framework, the attack framework, and then maybe where we need to add some more controls. It's also really good for tabletop exercises. I've seen organizations that say, you know what, on a monthly basis, we're going to bring our team in. We're going to set the security team around the table, or maybe have a representative from, sysadmins and the network team and the developers or whatnot. And we're going to talk about each one of these. We're going to start with execution and say, okay, command and scripting interpreter. Let's dive into that technique. And let's talk about what would this look like? Could an attacker pull this off? How would they pull it off? How would we detect it? What controls do we have in place? Are we detecting that now? If not, is that because it's happening and we don't know it? Or because it's just not happening? How would we know? How do we find out? That's a great way to, one, expand the knowledge of your team, and two, get into some practicality of, where your security controls are at and if they're doing a good job. And then the last idea here, this is something that I've done personally recently, is analyzing tooling capabilities. So we've had some customers come to us and say, hey, look, we're looking at buying either this product or this product, right? Some managed detection and response tools. And we want to know, do they really work the way they say they do? And how well? And does it cause problems in our environment and whatnot? So in one case, back in January and February, this company had they set up a test environment within their corporate network with two of these competing products. And they had me spend a couple of weeks going in and launching attacks. And basically what we did is we walked through the attack framework and picked out probably 30 or 40 different attack techniques, and then said, okay, let's document those. Let's come up with a very specific test method. And so we kind of came up with a methodology. And then we said, okay, we've installed this MDR here. I'm going to launch this attack. I'm going to notify them. I'm going to keep a very detailed log of the timestamp and what happened. And then we did that, and we just walked through. And then we went to the other tooling on a different test environment and said, let's do the same thing. Let's do this attack against these systems in this order. Let's keep track of the data. And then they go through their logging process and say, okay, this tool notified us of this and this. It saw this, but it didn't tell us. Maybe we need to bump up the alerting. It didn't notice this and this at all, that sort of thing. And so they were able to analyze before they purchased this tool for, you know, however many, I think they probably have 10 or 15,000 licenses. Before they bought all that, they were able to analyze the two products and say, you know, this is the one that works best for us, as opposed to the other. So I think that's a really neat way of doing that. And I think we're going to start to see more and more stuff like that as the attack framework continues to get built out. And what I think is going to happen is a lot of these organizations, a lot of these products are going to do that themselves. I think they're going to go through the process and say, you know what, let's make sure that we really have coverage of all of this stuff. Because for the first time ever, we have documented data, and it's almost actuarial level data of what attacks look like and how they work and specific details on attack groups and what they use more than others. So I think some of these security tools will be able to use that to figure out, you know, where do we invest in making them better. Before I go to the next thing, I wanted to talk just briefly about security control types. There's a couple of different ways that you can handle security controls, or a couple of different types of security controls. One is preventative, right? Like I'm application whitelisting. That's a preventative tool. I am not going to let you run whatever on this system. Detective tools are more of I'm monitoring the logs, and when I see something suspicious, I'm going to be notified and I'm going to do something, right? But it's a detective control to watch and see what happens. The third one is responsive. The idea that we've detected something happening, and so we're going to respond as quickly as possible. And then the fourth is corrective, right? We've responded. Here's how we get back to the way we were before, so we can, you know, reset everything and go back to business as usual. For the most part, the attack framework really focuses on, or it benefits us by mapping out the first two, preventative controls and detective controls. I mean, realistically, you can use the attack framework to make sure that you're getting alerts for different types of attacks. That's absolutely great. And that's definitely that can feed into your responsive processes, but that really is more of a detective type of situation. And really the attack framework doesn't focus on corrective controls at all. It's totally focused on understanding attackers and, you know, their motivations, their goals, their techniques and tactics and all that. So, all right, so let me talk a little bit about Attack Navigator. This is something that a lot of people haven't seen, even if they're fairly familiar with the attack framework. This is a web-based tool written by Mitre, and just it's free open source. The majority of stuff they put out there is open source. They put it out there as a way for folks to be able to interact with the attack framework. You know, you can do what I just showed you. You can pull up the website, you can scroll through, click, you can read a lot. But if you actually want to use the data, well, now you got to pull it into Excel, or you got to pull it into some other tool and do it that way. That can be a hassle. So Navigator is one tool to make that easier to do. There are some commercial tools out there. There are people that have done stuff like this as well. But Navigator's free. It's extremely customizable. There's a couple of neat things you can do. So you can import other data sources, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second. You can have multiple layers where you show, like, here's certain types of controls, and then we click this layer and show certain types of controls. There's some custom fields where you can give certain techniques, certain scores or comments. You know, we're really not worried about this one right now, or this, it doesn't apply to us in this particular, you know, use case or whatever. And then you can enable and disable things if maybe they don't apply and you want to shrink it down. So let me show you, let me pull this back over here and just show you what that looks like. I've got it right here. So when I go to Navigator, the first thing it does is I've started a new one. It's brand new. It's GitHub. So it doesn't actually store anything on the server. It's all in your browser, which means you want to make sure you export stuff and save stuff before you finish, or else you'll lose it. But in this case, I've got a new tab, and I'm just going to create a new layer. And it asks me which matrix I want to use. I'm going to use the enterprise one. And, well, that happened sooner. I don't know what the other options are. Oh, other options. I can choose different versions, attack 9, attack 8, whatever, if I wanted to. Or I can add different domains, but okay. So I'm just going to go back to the layer I just created. And again, it looks very similar to the framework we saw earlier, but there's some differences. One, this is one layer. And you notice if I move over here, like deploy container is actually in two different places. It's a defense evasion, and it's part of execution. There's another one. several in here. You see them, they kind of light up. There we go. Hijack execution flow. That's part of persistence. That's part of privilege escalation, and that's part of defense evasion. It's used in different tactics for different reasons. And so if I right click on those, I can see the technique number. I can select it. I can add selection. I can do multi-select. So I select multiple deals. Common things, select all, deselect all. I can view the technique, and it'll open up over here in a new page, take me right to it, just like if I was in the actual attack framework. View the tactic, etc. But what's neat, if I select it, let's say I'm going to select that one, and then I can come over here. I don't know if you can see this, but up here on the top right, technique controls. So I can toggle the state. So if you notice, when I click this toggle button, that grays out. And so I can say, you know what? I don't care about this one. This one does not affect me. I'm going to disable it and not show up on my stuff anymore. And you can actually hide whichever one it is. There's a setting in here to be able to hide stuff that's that you've grayed out or not. That might be under layer controls. You can also change the color. I can say, you know what? This one I want to be red. And so that one's going to show up as red. And I can go through and here are the 10 things we're going to work on this year, and I'm going to mark them as blue, and I'm going to name this layer 2001 or 2021. And then next year, I'm going to pick a different color and a different layer, and I'm going to show, here are the 10 things we're working on. And then, after 2 or 3 years, I'll be able to look back and say, here's all the different stuff we've worked on. Or I can, when my board looks at it and says, what is your 5-year goal? I can say, look, here's the next 5 years worth of tabs, and here's the different colors. And our goal is to get 80% coverage of this over a 5-year period, right? You can do stuff like that. Scoring, I can give a specific score. I can select just this one, or I can select 5 or 10 of them. And I can say, you know what, this is a 2021 goal, or maybe I'm going to rate this at a 5 to 6 for us. Nope, I guess it's got to be a number. You got to give it a number. So I'm going to rate it as a score of 5. And then comments, same kind of deal. I can add a comment here. We really need to think about this, so then we can come back to that later and think about what it was. So now if I come over here, like when I highlight that, I don't know if you can see that on my screen, but it shows the score of it right above, and it shows the comment so that we know, hey, this is something we've talked about. This is something we need to focus on. With layers, you can do some other stuff. You can actually download a specific layer. You can export it to Excel. You can export it to SVG, which is great if you're needing to make a really nice looking screenshot to put in your spreadsheet to go to, to your PowerPoint, so that when you give a presentation to the board, you've got that. You can sort with filters and scoring and do a couple of different things. But there's one thing that's even better. And to do this, I got to go back and talk about data sources. So where are we at time-wise? 1:30. Okay, great. So I mentioned data sources earlier. This is something that is it's not fairly new. They've had the idea around for a while, but they completely revamped it in the last year. They've significantly redesigned it to say, we're going to come up with standard ways of providing data sources that help you determine what you can see and what you can't see, what type of insight into your organization. The focus over the last year has kind of been on improving the data quality, the structure of what's included. So an example here, this is just a screenshot pulled from one of their talks. Maybe the data source is a process, right? Which processes are running? Well, from that, you can understand process creation, timestamps, when it was created and all that kind of stuff. You can have process metadata. Actually, that may come to the timestamp. And you can see which process was created, where it's at, who did it, all that kind of stuff. And then you have relationships between the different elements. And you can see, like, specifically the event log number, the Windows event log ID that is tied to that. And so they've gone through, this is just a very small example. There are literally thousands and thousands of these to scroll through. But here's why that matters. There is a neat tool, and this is not created by Mitre, but it works really well, called DeTT&CK, right? They obviously use the same little ampersand thing thrown in there. And I want to show you how this works. Go back. So where's my Firefox window? There it is. If we go look at DeTT&CK, it's an open source GitHub product that you can scroll through and you can look at and whatnot. And they got details here. So it's detect tactics, techniques, and combat threats. I'm not going to go through and explain all that you can do here, but what's really, really cool is, where's it at? Towards the top, right here, the detect editor. And I've got the link there in the slides as well. But if you right click here on detect editor, I'm going to open that in a new tab. This gives me the ability to create a data source that then I can import into ATT&CK. Now, you might be able to do this with other tools, right? If you're using, let's say, CrowdStrike or Cylance or Palo Alto's Cortex or whatever it is you might be using, they might be able to generate a data source and say, here are the things we're able to detect. At least that's the goal of where we're going with this. But with this, you can go through here and you can say, I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to, for my file, blah, 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 I'm going to give it a name. I guess I can't change the name. Oh, yeah, okay. So this is example 1. I'm going to add a data source. And my data source is going to be, let's say like, hold on. Here we go. So when I start typing, it pops up a bunch of stuff there. Application log content. Okay, whatever goes in the application log. And I'm going to enable that and say that it's available for analytics. And I'm going to add another one. And I'm going to say user account authentication. So all of the events and activities and stuff that go around with user account authentication. And I'm just making stuff up here. But let's say I have something around process creation. So I've got that. I know for sure that these 3 data points are being logged. They're being sent to my SIM. And that I'm getting alerts when these types of things happen. Now I can save that YAML file, and that will let me, we're just going to save the file. Let's see what pops up. Hopefully it's not too embarrassing. Oh, I guess it saved it to my downloads. Okay, cool. Here's the problem. The ATT&CK framework, when we go back over here to, I'm sorry, the Navigator, when we go to Navigator, I can say, let's create a new layer. And I'm going to open an existing layer and I'm going to upload it from a file. But the problem is it doesn't want a YAML file. It wants downloads. It wants a, nope. It wants a JSON file, but I just downloaded a YAML file. So as part of that, if we go back to that open source tool, they've got a process where you can convert it. And I'm just going to show you. Here's what I need to do. I need to, let's see, where did I save that? It was in my downloads, right? So we're going to copy from, hold on, I don't remember what it, pull this over here real quick so I can see what it is. This is my demo gods making sure this works correctly. Okay. So the file is in, come on, go back. Downloads and come on. It was new. Oh, not new again, voice. Killing me here. Killing me, Smalls. Data sources new. That's what it was. Data sources new. All right. So that's my file. And I'm going to run that to, I'm going to copy it to my input folder here. And just because of the way this works, I've got this in a Docker container. But if I go up here and run this, nope, controls here in the previous window. I really considered doing this ahead of time. I thought, no, it'll work great. I don't need to do this. It'll work just fine. Come on. My copy and paste isn't working. There we go. All right. So when I run that, there we go. Now it should have created, if I go in here to my output folder, there we go. Data sources example _1.json. So now when I switch back over to my Firefox, I'm going to upload my file, and from downloads, ATT&CK, output, and this is the one we just created today at 1:45. I'm going to click open, and it's going to create a new layer, and I can name this whatever I want. I can change the name and say this is, test 1, whatever. but it's going to highlight all of the stuff. And if you notice, like if I move over, this one, it says user account authentication. You can see the available data sources. This one is a dark purplish, comes from user account authentication. This one below it is light purple because it comes from process creation. Down here, there's a darker purple that comes from, that says process creation as well. Sometimes if they come from multiple sources, they'll be colored different colors. But you can see where it loads those up and demonstrates, you know, I can put through, because I have these particular security controls in place, this is going to show me where it's at and what I've got coverage at. And then I can look and say, okay, I'm not so much worried about those. What are these others? Set UID, set GUI ID. All right, so let me go look at that, view that technique. What controls do I have to have in place? File modification, command execution. Okay, so I've got to make sure that I'm getting logging data for that and alerting data on those in order to take that out. And so I can start to go through and figure out where my coverage is at and where it's not. So there, like I said, there are some commercial tools. There are people that will charge you a lot of money for this same type of process, but you can do all this yourself if you want to as well. It's pretty easy. The magic that I did there on the command line, typing in the command and all that, that's all right here on the detect process or the GitHub. If you scroll down there, it explains exactly what to do, and you can walk through the installation requirements. I just did it kind of quickly for the point of the webinar, so you didn't have to deal with it. I tried to install this myself on a where's the install? I think it's in the installation requirements. There's quite a few requirements for Python. Yeah, here's all the attack CTI, EQL, pandas, plotly, blah blah blah. Instead, I just did it under Docker, and literally, I mean, it took 3 minutes, right, from the time I said I did. Where was the command? Right here, Docker pull, and then the name, and within 3 minutes I was up and running. So if you've never used Docker, it's very simple and easy to get up and running, and it's a great way to do stuff like that. What it does is it just creates a kind of a containerized little private portion of your drive, of your directory, so that it's got all the stuff within that it needs, and it's only running when you tell it to run. Right. So when we're done with this webinar, I'll go in there and I'll stop that Docker container. And it's kind of like a virtual machine, right? It's running and then it stops, and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. So anyway, great, easy way to clean that up when you're done. Wrapping up here, there's a few things. We're getting close to the end of the hour, but some considerations, things to think about. First off, you can't cover everything all at once. Oh, hold on. Let me move my command prompt here. You can't cover everything all at once. Mitre is huge, and it can be extremely overwhelming when you get in there and try to look at it and say, what am I going to do with this? Some of your security vendors can help to some degree. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. I've had conversations with people about, hey, can we do this with Mitre? Well, kind of, sort of, maybe, kind of, sort of, maybe not. But there's things they can do, especially your endpoint security tools. I guarantee you they are already having conversations about Mitre, about what they can cover and what they can't and all that. So dig into that. One of the best recommendations I've seen from different places is start with a small list. There are a lot of, if you search top 20 attack techniques, with the ampersand, ATT&CK, you will get a bunch of blog posts that say, this is the most important top 20. I don't know which of them are right. I don't know if any of them are right. Most likely every organization is a little bit different. But if you pick one and say, okay, we're going to start with this 20, and over the next 6 months, we're going to try to do as much as we can to minimize the likelihood of these 20 attacks working. And then the next 6 months, we're going to work on a different 20. Obviously, that depends on how many people you have associated with it. This can literally be a full-time job. Like we've got customers that they have a team of people really whose job is to analyze different types of attacks and threats and figure out, do we have the right controls in the right place to mitigate those threats? So it can get overwhelming, but just try to take little bites, small pieces at a time, keep working on it. You'll get through it. And most importantly, don't get lost in the weeds. It's so easy to dive into a particular technique or tactic and say, this is the biggest thing. This is the problem that I'm really worried about. And I'm so focused on this. And you spend all your time on that one thing, making sure that you can detect it perfectly, and you don't get anything done on any of the others. So try to keep a high level perspective a little bit and try to say, our goal is to not be perfect on any one thing, but to do a little bit better than we did yesterday on everything. And then you can kind of move forward from there. So that wraps it up. I know that was a pretty quick run through, but I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions and then let you get back to your day if you've got other stuff going on. So I didn't see any questions. Does anybody else have any
questions so far? You guys are good. I'm sorry I was late, Nathan, but it was awesome to listen to.
So Julio had a question here about mappings of Mitre to NIST. I have not personally seen that. I don't know. It's entirely possible that there are somewhere. I'm trying to think if NIST is sort of like Mitre in that it's a large organization that does a lot of different stuff. There's a couple of different frameworks for NIST that people use for cybersecurity. There's the small business framework. There's I think the one that you're talking about, I can't remember the name of it offhand. But I don't think there's a direct one-to-one correlation because NIST tends to be focused on, here are the high-level things we're doing to protect our organization. It tends to be defensive focused, whereas the attack framework is attack focused. And it's not that either one is right or wrong. It's that they kind of work together, right? If you're doing the NIST framework well, then you should, and if you're completing things and you're making progress there, then you should already have a lot of the attack framework categories filled out, right? Once you start applying that, you should be able to look at that and say, oh yeah, we already handle this and this and this and this and this. But the other thing there too, and this is something that the attack framework doesn't do a good job of, there's not a good way to distinguish between we prevent that technique and we detect that technique, right? Because those are two different things. There will be some things that you detect well. There'll be other things that you prevent well. And, defense in depth, you should strive to be able to do both. So, I don't really have a good answer, but I don't think there's a direct mapping. If anybody has done a mapping like that, I would imagine it's probably fairly contrived. And they probably took some liberties with being able to figure that out. All right. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.